Hello and welcome to the lecture on chapters 7 and 8. These might be two of the most important chapters in this whole course. And I really enjoy talking about these because I think they're so important. So in chapter 7, we're going to talk about target markets. So how you take all of the people that might potentially buy your product and divide them into groups so that you can know them in a more meaningful way and develop solutions for them in a more meaningful way. And I'll give an example from my old business and then relate that to what you guys are doing. The second part of this will be about competition, about knowing who you're up against, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and how you should position yourself relative to those competitors. So the first thing I want to talk about, target markets. Knowing your customer is kind of a cliche. It's almost a trite phrase. Of course, everybody should know their customers. And before I had owned my own business, I used to think knowing your customers meant, having a list of their names and addresses. That really isn't what it's about. I had somebody tell me once that to really know your customers, you should know what they worry about when they wake up in the middle of the night, what their hopes and dreams are, what they love the most about life. If you can know them to that extent, then you can really provide products and services that make a meaningful difference in their lives and have an important relationship with them that will protect you against the next competitor coming along with a product similar to yours. So you want to know who they really are, what their needs and desires are, how do they see themselves, how do they behave, what can they afford, and then most importantly, what problems do they have that you might be able to solve? And it might be problems in terms of products they don't have that they wish they had, and it might be conveniences, things that they can't get without a lot of trouble that you can offer an easier means to. It's really important to have a market orientation versus a product orientation. So it's very common for people that start businesses to be in love with their product and to be thinking about their product all the time, the bells and whistles and how to make it better and kind of the engineering behind it. Certainly in the case of people that are into brewing craft beers and distilled spirits, you guys are going to geek out about all of the different ways that you could do that, and your focus will be very much on that. The problem with that is it's an inward focus rather than an external focus. And that can cause you to miss trends. It can cause you to not read the market, not understand what your competitors are doing. That looking inwardly versus outwardly can be a dangerous thing. So it's something that as a business owner, you'll always have to remind yourself, while your product and your services are important and they do require focus and attention, that can't be your sole focus and attention. An example here, the company that bought my company, Big Toys, the current owner of it, is a very inwardly focused company, very much focused on production techniques and that sort of thing. And here's something from their Facebook page. They describe some products that they have for young children, one of which is an HDPE playhouse. You may not know this, but HDPE stands for high density polyethylene. It's a type of plastic panel that you can machine and route and drill and so forth. So they built a playhouse out of that material. And of course, from an internal focus, that's a playhouse built from high density polyethylene. Well, would any child care director, any preschool teacher know what that is? And here it is on their Facebook page as a message directed at that group. So that to me was a really clear example of an inward focus rather than thinking about who their customers are and how they interpret what they're reading. So a market analysis can save you money in the long run. So a market analysis is that whole process of getting to know the customer segment that you want to pursue. So it's doing demographic research online, it's talking to customers, talking to potential customers, reading what they're reading, understanding where they're coming from. All of that should be differentiated from your marketing plan. So market analysis is gaining a deeper understanding of the customers you want to serve A marketing plan is simply, this is the message I want to give to those customers, and this is how I'm going to deliver it. Am I going to have banner ads on websites? Am I going to have Facebook ads? Am I going to have Google AdWord placement? Am I going to have radio ads? Whatever the case is, that's your marketing plan. So the way a market analysis can save you money is it can refine that message so you and refine how you deliver it and who you deliver it to, so that you're not taking that shotgun approach of having a generic message go to a lot of people and hoping some of it sticks. It's important to recognize that you might market to multiple levels of customers. If you're trying to get your beer in a tavern, you might think of your customers as being the people that drink your beer. Well, in that case, in the example I just gave, the owner of that particular tavern is your first line customer. You have to sell them before you can sell to the individuals that are going to buy your beer. So you have multiple levels of customers that require different messages and different approaches and different ways of communicating. It's really important to avoid being overly broad, meaning if you say, I want to sell to every single person over 21 years of age in Thurston County, you can't say anything meaningful at all about that group of people or define what their problem is that you can solve or anything like that. So you need to be narrower and define. Now, you're willing to sell to anybody, of course, but your focus should be narrower. So your target market, the group you decide you want to go after, is going to determine the features and benefits of your product. So it's going to determine potentially the IBU level of your beer, or the alcohol content of your beer, or the caloric content of your beer. Whatever the case is, it's going to define the nature of the product you deliver. It's going to influence the form of packaging you use. Are you selling cans, bottles, kegs? Are you selling growlers? What kind of packaging is going to be required that will meet the needs of the target customer that you want to pursue? Of course, I mentioned earlier, what kind of marketing? Where do those customers get their messages from? That's really important. It could determine where you're located potentially, and then how you actually make sales, get money from customers. So your target market should be definable. You should be able to describe it in fairly simple terms. There's an example in the book that you can take a look at. It should be meaningful, meaning it shouldn't just be a random collection of people. It should be a group of people that have something in common that relates to what it is you're doing. It should be big enough that it could support your efforts. If I told you that my target market for my consulting service was individuals with an annual income of greater than $1 million a year in Thurston County, I'm guessing that's probably a pretty small number of people. That may not be a big enough market to support my business. So it has to be narrow enough to be meaningful, but big enough to be profitable. And it's a matter of finding that sweet spot. It has to be a group that you can reach. It has to be a group that you can contact in some way, either through social media or through traditional advertising, that sort of thing. There are different ways to segment a market. It could be demographic. You could say, I want to create a product for people in their late 20s that are urban professionals with a college education. That would be a demographic description. So whether it's age or ethnicity or education levels, those kinds of things, income levels, those are all demographic descriptions. Lifestyle description would be, I want to sell a product that appeals to people that are runners, or I want to sell a product to people that are outdoors people that are hunters and fishermen, those kind of things. That would be a lifestyle thing. And psychographic has to deal with how people see themselves. Maybe you want to produce a product that appeals to people that are altruistic. And so you say, for every X amount of my product, we're going to donate this to the World Wildlife Fund, or some other cause that aligns with the group that you want to market to. So Tom's Shoes is a good example of that. For every pair of shoes they sell, they donate a free pair to somebody in a third world country. That appeals to wealthy people that want to make the world better. And so they're willing to buy these shoes because it makes them feel good about themselves. So shoes sell for a lot of money. They sell at Nordstrom's, high-end stores. And so that company is defining their market by that kind of way of thinking. Other items that are under consideration is purchasing patterns. So when do they buy your product and what quantities do they buy your product? Buying sensitivities would be how sensitive are they to price and those sorts of things. And then determining the market size, are there trends? And there's some examples in the book that you can take a look at. So I'll give you an example from my old company, from the playground company, Big Toys, that I used to own. And so our customer groups and the customer groups for all commercial playground companies really revolve around park departments, schools, and early childhood centers or preschools, daycare centers. So for park departments, that could be divided between large cities and counties like Seattle Park Department, the Chicago Park Department, very large parks and that sort of thing. And then the other category was small to medium cities. So in looking at those two groups of customers separately, I could see that as a smaller company, we would have much greater success marketing to small to medium cities and counties. So selling to the city of Tumwater versus the city of Los Angeles as an example. So that enabled us to talk more directly with those kinds of customers, find out what their needs were, market to them more efficiently, and not kind of chase business that we wouldn't get anyways. With schools, there's really two categories. There's new school construction, and then there's after the school is built, 10 years down the road when they replace the playground, and that's usually done by a parent-teacher association or a parent-teacher organization, but parents that come together and have fundraisers and that sort of thing. We found that was a much better segment of the market for us because we could talk about what the benefit to the children was of our particular designs. And because these were parents of children that were at that school that would directly benefit, they appreciated that message and it was meaningful to them. Whereas new school construction is very appealing. There's a lot of money being spent in that area, but the decision on which product is purchased is made by a general contractor. They don't care about the benefits to children necessarily. It's purely an economic decision for them. So it allowed us to, again, not market in some areas, not pursue some customers, and pursue other customers, PTAs, that we'd have better success with. Early childhood centers. There are large preschool chains like Tutor Time and La Petite Academy and those big companies. They primarily buy on price and they negotiate contracts with large competitors of mine. There are corporate preschools, so companies that have a preschool associated with their business for their employees. There are independent preschools, which are kind of mom and pop type backyard preschools that usually just buy a swing set at Costco. And then there's a category I'll call hippie preschools. These are kind of preschools where the kids spend an awful lot of time outside. They have a heavy arts-based curriculum usually. You kind of get the feel for what I'm talking about. And as I got to know that segment of the market more, I found that they were heavily influenced by a book that had come out called Last Child in the Woods. About what this author termed nature deficit disorder. The fact that there are kids that have never climbed a tree, that have never jumped in a pile of leaves or caught a tadpole in a creek or any of those kinds of experiences that a lot of us take for granted. And there's significant implications in kids not having that aspect of nature as part of their life. And so it leads to ADHD, it leads to future voters and adults that don't have a connection to nature that might influence their voting decisions, those kinds of things. So preschools in this area or in this segment really bought into this concept very strongly. And because I understood that and knew that, I could develop products that would specifically speak to the desire that they had to incorporate more nature into the experiences that children had where they spent most of their waking hours, which is the preschool or the daycare center. So I was able to slightly adapt my products to incorporate nature into those products. I took one of my standard playhouses here and I added some simple lumber to the enclosures on the sides that you could put dirt in that had drain holes on the bottom, and you could turn a playhouse into, we marketed this as a green thumb potting shed for children. And I can tell you that it tapped into a desire that this segment of the market had, that I literally had people hugging me at trade shows because they were so thankful we had developed a product like that. And it was something none of our competitors did. So that's a kind of a tangible benefit of drilling down, looking at a segment of the market and understanding them, and then developing what is often a fairly simple solution to what they need. The other thing I want to talk about is competition. And it's important to keep in mind that every business has competition. When I first started working with the Hands-On Children's Museum in Olympia, I thought, well, they don't have any competition. There's not another children's museum anywhere close to here, really. So they're a business without any competition. And then I had to think, well, you have to define it really more broadly. The business they're in it's a good place for people to bring their kids to be engaged in a healthy activity on a time when they're not in school. That's really what their business is. And so when you think about it more broadly like that, their competitors are movie theaters, Defy, those trampoline businesses, miniature golf. I mean, all different kinds of things that you can do with kids when they're not in school. And so when you think of it more broadly like that, then your pricing, you can think about your pricing in those terms. What do those other people charge for you being somewhere for a couple hours with your kid? That sort of thing. It's important to know your competitors in the sense that you need to understand in what ways they're better than you. And you need to look at them very objectively and say, what do they do better than me? What do they do not so good that we could do better? So how can we differentiate? If you're going to enter a business where you're going to do exactly the same thing as other people, you're likely not going to be successful. You have to do something differently in a way that is better, that is meaningful to the customers that you want to serve. And you can't really differentiate yourself if you don't understand what you're differentiating from, if that makes sense. So shopping your competitors, go and visit their store like a customer, talk to people about it, read what's written online about them, although you can take some of that with a grain of salt, but experience it for yourself. It can help to make a matrix to see where competitors are placed in a market. When I first started working in the outdoor fitness equipment market, so fitness equipment that is installed in public parks, I did this matrix of all the companies that were making products in that area. And in this case, I chose the criteria for the matrix to be low price and to high price and low quality to high quality. You could choose other kinds of criteria. It could be price and convenience. It could be in any other factors. It should be factors that are meaningful to customers. And so when you do this, oftentimes you find this kind of an arrangement where you have a cluster of companies in the, I'll call it the Walmart square, kind of the lower left-hand corner, where it's low quality, low price, value orientation, kind of getting more for your money, that kind of category. If you have a product that's low quality, high price, generally that's not successful and they're not in business for very long. So that's why you don't see any companies in the category right above the value category, the upper left corner there. And then significantly or alternatively in the low price, high quality, well, that's building a better mousetrap. If you can build a product better than anybody else's and have it have a low price, you're of course going to win. So that's pretty rare. You don't see much in that lower right-hand corner. So the upper right corner, that's kind of the Mercedes or the BMW range. It's higher quality and higher price. The company that I started in the US was Norwell. And so when I was able to look at quality objectively by looking at the engineering stats of all the products, what were they made from, what were the coatings like, did they use bearings versus bushings, I mean, all the technical kinds of things, it was fairly easy to say where people were at from a quality standpoint. And then pricing, I could look at a common selection of 5 products that all of these companies had in common, pull-up bar, sit-up bench, etc. And I could look at their retail price, and that was fairly easy to quantify. So I could see here that we could sell a product that was objectively higher quality. In our case, Norwell built all of our products out of stainless steel, so that alone made it a higher quality than the other companies. And our price wasn't going to be the highest. So that was a good position to be in. But again, I had to know my competitors fairly well to be able to construct a grid like this. If I had found that my product was going to be medium quality but the highest price, I wouldn't have launched the product in this market. I would have gone back to the drawing board. So this kind of a matrix can be helpful, and sometimes you can elicit your friends to and acquaintances to help you judge quality, that sort of thing as well. There's a couple of charts in the book that I wanted to point out that might be beneficial to you in terms of looking at competitors. You could compare your company to different competitors based on products and features, what varieties do they offer, and that sort of thing. How broad is their product line? What other costs are associated with owning that product? Quality issues, certainly. I would think in distilled spirits, how refined is the distilling process? How many times has it been distilled? That sort of thing might be relevant. I don't think durability and maintenance will be too relevant for most of you. Image style, that's an important thing. Customer relationships, so what are they strong in terms of distributors, I think primarily in your product. What kind of social consciousnesses they have. That first column, max 1 to 10, is a way of weighting those different things. So maybe you'd weight durability maintenance 0, but quality a 10, and those sorts of things. So it's a way of weighting it and then applying scores to those different things. To continue with that, so the first things that I talked about were external things. Now these are internal. So what kind of financial resources do your competitors have? Do they have deep pockets, and are they able to pull things off you might not be able to? What do they spend on marketing? And some of these are guesses. I mean, most of your competitors aren't going to publish this information. Economies of scale means the bigger companies are able to buy raw materials at a cheaper level than you are, so that's an advantage for them. Operational efficiencies, that's, do they make their own stuff, or do they contract out those kinds of things? Do they do their own bottling or canning operations, or do they have somebody else do that? Breadth of product line, we mentioned that earlier. What range of products do they have? What kind of strategic partnerships do they have? So do they have relationships with other companies that benefit them in a way that might cause them to be stronger than you? And then personnel, what kind of, how strong is their team effectively? Last, there's a couple of other factors I want to talk about. One is the first mover advantage. What that means is being the first to the market with something can be an advantage. Usually it's a temporary advantage. I would imagine the first company that came out with airbags, might have been Volvo or somebody like that, they probably had an advantage, but as soon as everybody else had airbags, that's no longer an advantage. If I told you that a particular car company was the first to come out with airbags, would that influence your decision to buy that car now? Probably not, right? Installed user base, so are there a lot of distributors that currently have that product on their shelves or have tap handles for that product? That is kind of that is the installed user base. It's hard to supplant that. It's hard to get that knocked out and get your product in. and that's because of customer inertia. It takes something for somebody to fire a supplier and go with somebody else, right? Keeping things the same as they have been is kind of the natural order of things, so it's hard to disrupt that. Barriers to entry, that is either regulations that you have to comply with, certifications that are required, minimum amounts of inventory you have to have on hand in order to satisfy a particular distributor. I had a product that I managed to get listed on Costco.com at one time, and they required that we had to have 50 units of that product. Each one was $1,000 a piece. We had to have 50 on hand at all times to meet whatever demand came through that website. So that was a barrier to entry. It took a certain amount of money to have that inventory on hand at all times. So that may be an issue for some of you. Market share is the proportion of the market for a particular product that any company has. So understanding if there are dominant players in the niche that you're pursuing, that is a factor. So there's some examples in the book you can look at as well. So if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to email me, and thank you for your time and attention.